the shoebox that Angela Boateng kept under her bed in her sister's spare room in Marietta, Georgia, there was a rental agreement. It was dated April 2022, signed by a person named Anthony Williams, with a Savannah, Georgia address, a phone number she did not recognize, and a rental payment history showing 11 months of on-time deposits into a property management account she had set up in 2019 for her 3-bedroom house in Smyrna. She had hired the property manager remotely from London, where she had been living since 2020. She had trusted the process. She had received her deposits. She had not asked questions. Anthony Williams did not exist. Angela had discovered this in March 2023, when she flew back to Atlanta after her London contract ended and went to inspect the Smyrna property before reoccupying it. She had given the property manager 60 days' notice. The property manager had communicated the notice to the tenant. The tenant had vacated mostly. What Angela found when she arrived at the house was a property that had been occupied with considerable personal investment. A repainted kitchen in a color she had not chosen, new cabinet hardware, a reorganized garage, and, in the 2nd bedroom, a cardboard box of personal items that the tenant had apparently left behind in the move. Inside the box was a family photograph. She recognized every person in it. Anthony Williams was her brother, Daniel. Angela had not spoken to Daniel in 4 years, not since a disagreement over their mother's estate that had ended with Daniel telling Angela that she had always gotten everything and he had always been overlooked, and Angela telling Daniel that what he called overlooking she called consequences, and both of them saying things that had not been taken back. She had left for London 6 months later. She had listed the house with a property manager specifically because she had wanted it handled by someone at a distance. Someone with no connection to the family, someone who would not know or care that the house belonged to a woman whose brother thought she had always gotten everything. Daniel had found out the house was vacant. He had applied through the property manager with a fabricated name, a fabricated reference history, and a phone number that went to a prepaid device. He had moved in. He had lived there for 11 months. He had remodeled parts of it, apparently with care, apparently as though he intended to stay. She stood in her own kitchen for a long time, looking at the cabinet hardware. She had come to the family feud stage with her friend Josephine, her cousin Abina, Abina's husband Kofi, and her neighbor from the old neighborhood, a woman named Vera, who had known both Angela and Daniel growing up, and who had, when Angela told her what she had found, said, "I am going to need a minute." She had taken the minute and then said, "I'm going on that show with you. You are not carrying this alone." Nobody in that studio knew that the woman at the first podium had found her estranged brother living in her house under a different name. Daniel was 3 years younger than Angela, 41 to her 44, and had been, for most of their shared childhood, the person Angela was most protective of. Their mother, Abina, had worked 2 jobs. Angela had been the older one, the one who made sure Daniel ate, who helped with homework, who walked him to school in the mornings and met him at the corner in the afternoons. She had gone to university on a partial scholarship and worked the rest. Daniel had not finished his degree. He had moved between jobs and cities in the way that some people move, not directionless exactly, but without the kind of anchoring that comes when early life instability never quite resolves. She had helped him over the years. Money, connections, phone calls to people she knew. She had helped the way older siblings help when they have something and the younger one is still finding it. She had never kept score. She had never presented the help as leverage. She had tried to give it the way it was meant, as love, not as credit. The estate disagreement had been real. Their mother had left the Smyrna house to Angela, specifically and in writing, with a note that explained, "Angela has always made a home. This house should belong to her." Daniel had been left a cash sum. He had not felt the division was equal. Angela had felt that equal was not the same as right, that their mother had made a deliberate choice, and that she was not going to apologize for being the person their mother had trusted with property. The argument had ended the relationship. 4 years of silence, and then 11 months of Daniel living in her house as someone named Anthony Williams. The real story hadn't even started yet. Steve Harvey introduced the team and got to Angela and asked what she did. She said, "I'm project manager, currently between contracts, recently returned from London." He asked what brought her home. She said, "My house needed me." Steve paused. "What happened to your house?" She looked at Vera. Vera gave her the look that meant, "I'm right here." And Angela told him. She told it the way the evidence had arrived, in sequence, in the order of discovery. The rental agreement, the name she didn't recognize, the box, the family photograph, the cabinet hardware in a color she hadn't chosen. She said, "My brother lived in my house for 11 months under a fake name." She said, "The kitchen is remodeled." She said, "I stood in it for a long time looking at the hardware." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey had set his cards down. He was looking at Angela with the specific attention of a man who is making sure he heard correctly. "Your brother," he said. "Daniel," she said. "Yes. Lived in your house for 11 months, under a fake name. Anthony Williams." Steve turned to the audience. He turned back to Angela. He turned to the audience again. He looked like a man organizing a very complicated sentence. "I need everyone in this room to understand," he said slowly, "that this woman came home from London, opened her own front door, and found her brother's family photograph in the second bedroom." 300 people were not breathing. "The kitchen," Steve said. "What did he do to the kitchen?" "He repainted it," Angela said. "Taupe. It was white." Something passed over Steve's face that was equal parts disbelief and grief, and the specific expression that appears when a thing is so extraordinary it briefly overwhelms the emotional system. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. He turned slightly away from the cameras. He stood with his back to the audience for several seconds. When he turned back, he had made a decision. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I know what it is to do things in the dark that you cannot bring into the light. I know what it is to be the one who always got less, and to carry that resentment until it makes you do things you cannot defend. I was in my car for 3 years. I was so far down I couldn't see up. And I made choices during those years that I am not proud of." He paused. "I also know that the person who took from you is your brother, and that he painted the kitchen." He looked at Angela. "He painted the kitchen, which means some part of him, some very complicated, very broken part of him, was trying to make it a home. He was wrong. He was entirely wrong. But he was also, underneath all of it, a man trying to have a home. And you know that. I can see that you know that." Angela looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I know." "Stop everything," Steve said. He turned to the wings. "We're stopping the game. This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show." He walked Angela to the front of the stage and asked her what she needed. She said, "I need to know what to do with a brother who doesn't know how to ask for things without taking them." Steve nodded. He pulled out his phone. He called a family conflict and estrangement mediator his foundation worked with, live speaker on, the room hearing every word. He explained the situation clearly. 4-year estrangement, estate dispute origin, 11 months of unauthorized tenancy, a recently repainted kitchen. The mediator said, I know this pattern. I can work with it. The behavior is not about the house. It's about the conversation that never happened after the estate. Steve arranged sessions for both Angela and Daniel and covered all costs through his foundation, but Steve wasn't done. He also called a property attorney live. 2 minutes, specific question. What recourse does Angela have? The attorney said the tenancy, while unauthorized, had been paid in full. No damage had been done. And the primary issue was identity fraud in the application. He said, she has options, but she should understand those options before deciding. He said he would provide a free consultation. Steve confirmed it on the air. He turned to the competing family, the Asante family from Columbus, who had been listening with absolute attention, and their patriarch, a man named Frederick, was already standing. He looked at Angela and said, "Family is the only thing that breaks your heart and still gets the front door key." Both families received the $25,000 prize. The audience, which had been holding something complicated through the whole segment, finally released. Steve Harvey looked at Angela and into the camera and said 5 words. "The kitchen was always yours." When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the cabinet hardware detail, the specific visual of Angela standing in her kitchen looking at hardware she hadn't chosen, became one of the most discussed images in the show's history. It reached 210 million views in 9 days. The hashtag, "The kitchen was always yours," was used by people navigating family betrayal, estrangement, property disputes, and the specific grief of loving someone who takes instead of asks. Legal platforms cited the episode in discussions about identity fraud within families. 3 months after the taping, Angela called Daniel. He had seen the episode. He had not been watching it expecting to see himself. He had not known she'd been on the show. The call lasted 90 minutes. Angela has described it only as the hardest and most necessary conversation of my adult life. 6 months after the taping, they met in person. Angela brought Vera. Daniel came alone. They met at a restaurant and ate for 2 hours and talked about their mother and the house and the hardware and what Daniel had been trying to build in a house that was not his. He cried. Angela did not. She had cried alone before the meeting, which she said was the right order of things. The kitchen is still taupe. Angela says she has decided she does not mind taupe. A year after the taping, the Daniel Initiative, named not for her brother, but for the biblical principle of clarity under pressure, was established through Steve Harvey's foundation to provide legal and mediation resources for families navigating property disputes and unauthorized use within family systems. In its first year, more than 450 families were assisted. Its motto came from Frederick's words on the stage. "Family is the only thing that breaks your heart and still gets the front door key." Today, Angela Boateng lives in the Smyrna house. The kitchen is taupe. The cabinet hardware is still the hardware Daniel installed. She says every time she opens a cabinet, she thinks of him, which is, she says, complicated and also exactly right, which is how most things with Daniel have always been. If this story about family, property, and the complicated geometry of sibling love moved you, subscribe and hit that thumbs up. Share this with someone who needs to know that being wronged by someone you love is not the same as being done with them. Do you know a family navigating something like this? Let us know in the comments below.